Okay.
Okay, so I went ahead and hit record, and are you able to see the PowerPoint on your computer?
I do. I think we have somebody else on here with us, Margaret.
It's Margaret.
Oh, okay.
Have you met Margaret before?
I have not.
Margaret, would you mind introducing yourself to Hernando? And Hernando, you can introduce, Hernando, why don't you go ahead and go first and introduce yourself and let Margaret know a little bit of a background about yourself?
Sure. I'm originally from Long Island. I did my undergrad and my grad at SU. I'm now teaching 2 sections. Well, this semester I'm teaching 2 sections of IST 659. Is that good?
Did you say 359 database?
659. Yeah, database though.
Okay, awesome. Margaret, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself to Hernando? I'm not sure if she's still there.
Says she's still on.
Is she gone?
I know I always have an issue with my audio through my computer. I always have to call in. So I'm not sure maybe having the same problem.
Well, she's here on campus, so she was going to monitor the chat. So if you go ahead, maybe she's introduce herself in the chat. No, I don't see anyone in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Margaret works with us.
Sure. Sorry.
She is our strategist. She's been with us since January last year, and she graduated her LIS here last December. And the 2 years that she was the LIS student, she worked directly with the faculty center. So she's been with the faculty center for about 3 years.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the 5 ways. And if you think about the 5 ways, okay, it's not letting me do that. Bear with me. I'm using Claret for the first time. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back and reshare. There you go. Can you see it now, Hernando, again?
Yeah, I see the slide.
Okay. So this is the agenda that I'm going to walk through. That it talks about, we just did welcome and introductions, and I'm going to start off by talking about effective feedback, how it begins with guidelines. Then I'm going to talk about the 5 ways you can teach even more with feedback. And then I'm going to have you work on something at the end of what's called a formative assessment, and have you identify some feedback strategies that you can implement in your 659 database course. And then we'll do a quick summary. And then at the end, I'm going to share another document that has some effective feedback. And so I'm going to let you know that this particular presentation, I did a little bit of a different approach, Hernando. I'm going to share with you throughout each of the 5 ways. I'm going to share I'm going to explain that particular learning artifact, and I'm going to share research. I'm also going to share student feedback based on research, as well as research that we've done here at the iSchool from our own student feedback. Again, I'm also going to, on the slides that I'm doing the research, I'm adding the person's name and a couple of facts about that person.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So before we begin, when I was doing the research, I was very pleased when I found that a lot of articles say to have effective feedback, it has to begin with guidelines. The instructor needs guidelines, and they need to offer guidelines to the students. So the 3 top things that popped out at me, Hernando, were that to establish guidelines and expectations with your students. This could be done in the syllabus, or it can be done, throughout the class. It can be done individually in the class. It can be done through groups, through individuals. But it's for every learning artifact that you do, and for the overall course, is to make sure you have the guidelines and expectations set. Students need to be receptive to the feedback in terms of that you can give thorough feedback, but if the students aren't receptive to it and don't understand why you're giving the feedback, the thorough feedback is going to fall to the wayside. And the third guideline is make sure you're clear on how this progresses them towards their final goal.
Okay.
The two gentlemen that did thorough research, especially on the guidelines, is Pinterest and Shunt. Pinterest back in 1996, he did a research article, and I put it on the slide, but it's called The Role of Expectancy and Self-Efficiency Beliefs. And then he works at the University of Michigan, and he's collaborated with Dale Shunt from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and they wrote a book together on motivation and education theory, research, and application. And the basis off of that was how to begin with guidelines and base your learning artifacts around learning objectives. And you can see the quote on the slide. When students buy into their learning objectives, they display more positive attitudes towards learning, more effort and perseverance, and greater engagement in their schooling. And that's going to lead me right into, into the feedback. Here are two terms, and I'm sure you agree with these on what feedback is: useful information about effects of an action in light of a goal, and essential to learner for improvement. So in addition to those two things, Fernando, does anything else pop out at you as to what feedback means to you when you're teaching class?
Are you speaking specifically during class or like on assignments?
Anything. And so as we go through the session, I'm going to allude to actual feedback on assignments as well as feedback for the entire course.
I feel like the biggest issue that I have with feedback is feedback from the students when I'm asking them, are they understanding? I usually just get, sometimes I get blank stares and just head nods. So that's as far as like in class. But I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. So for clarification, so you're talking about feedback when you ask a student question or when you're responding to a student question?
So we've asked the question, they've answered the question. Some people got it wrong, some people got it right. I kind of let the class call out answers, which I probably should change. But so there'll be examples in my slides, and we'll kind of all work through them together. And eventually, if nobody figures it out, I'll just give them the answer. And I specifically ask, I take the time and say, did everybody understand that? Or if there's any questions about it, let me know if you have any questions right now about any of those points. And I kind of at times just get blank stares and just head nods.
Yes.
I guess my feedback is the asking them whether they're understanding all of the points correctly.
Right. Yeah, I get that too. That's a really hard one so we do have another session called questioning techniques, and I can share some of those with you on how different ways to question your students and different ways to get them motivated to not get those blank stares. I can share that information with you.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. But in terms of, you're spot on with the definition of feedback in terms of inside the classroom. And one of the articles I'm going to allude to later in the seminar actually talks about these professors did research and spoke directly with a lot of students. And the research article that I'm going to share later talks specifically about some of the things that you're just talking about, Fernando, how to really involve and get the students involved. And that's one of the 5 ways that we're going to use effective feedback. So spot on. That was awesome. Excellent, excellent.
And I was just gonna add that when it's a smaller class,
Right.
so 10 students, it's easier for me because I know all the students by name, and if I see who's giving me a blank stare, I'll actually ask them, "Oh, did you understand that?" Or "Did you understand that?" But when it's a larger class with 20-something students, it's harder to go through every person who's giving me a blank stare. You know what I mean?
It is really hard. Yeah, I have 29 students in my class. I usually have 30 to 32. It's the same thing. And there isn't any way you can get through the content of your class, every class, if you address every blank stare. However, do the blank stares really mean that they're not learning? Sometimes when you call on them, it's just a blank stare because they're absorbing. You know, so that's also hard too. But darn those blank stares. So in order to address those blank stares and to really think about what we're doing, these are 4 questions that I think we as instructors that we should be asking ourselves when we think about effective feedback and ways to use feedback in our own instruction. 1, when should I be giving feedback? You have to pick and choose when you give the feedback. Whether it's verbally in class, it's written after an assignment, and how timely is that feedback. Number 2, how do I set this up initially for long-term gain? That's what I alluded to before. We're going to talk about how to really use feedback to really accent the future orientation. And is feedback the same each time? And last but not least, is feedback different based on the different modes of content delivery or learning target? And one thing that you alluded to is it different depending on the size of the class. It could be very different.
So that actually leads me into a question.
Sure.
So in the first half of my class, I do entity relationship diagrams. So we're doing a lot of diagramming. And I have 8 labs throughout the course. For the first 3, I believe, we're doing entity relationship diagrams, and I have them actually print out the entity relationship diagrams along with their lab because I find it a lot easier to mark up the diagrams than it is to do on Blackboard. So for the first 3 labs, I always have them print them out and hand them in class, and then for labs 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, where they're just doing SQL and creating some forms and reports, they just submit them through Blackboard, and I just provide my feedback through Blackboard.
Okay.
So is that kind of what they're talking about on number 4,
yes.
where different modes require different modes for different content delivery or learning targets?
Yes, and different modes can also be, it could be in-class formative assessment. It could be you're having them turn it in, so you're giving written feedback. You can do inline grading on the grade book for, actually, I would love for you to test to have them upload it into Blackboard and see if you can do inline grading to do a markup, because you can mark up. It might make it too small though, but we can talk about that.
Say that again, to upload it into what?
So have you used inline grading in Blackboard?
Inline grading, I don't think so.
When a student submits, I can show you how to do this, or actually Jeff is doing a grade book session on Collaborate. I'm not sure when that's coming up. And he can walk you through, or I can do a one-on-one, or Jeff can do a one-on-one. And when you have the students upload their assignments into Blackboard, you go into the full grade center, you can actually see the document right in the grade book, and you can mark it up right in Blackboard.
Okay, yeah, I think I do know what you're talking about. You click on the attempt, or you click on the person's grade that you gave them, and then it pulls it up alongside on the right hand there's a pane that has the grade you want to give them and the comments you can make, and on the left side it shows the document. So I have used that, but I find it a little bit difficult to use as opposed to being able to write on the paper.
Yeah, that's fine. You can have them print. I just wasn't sure if they came up way too small for you to be able to do that. ERD document diagram, you want to be very specific and give them. So yeah, so that is a different mode. And also different modes of content delivery could be how you chunk it. You do labs versus like half the time you do lecture, half the time you do labs. That's also, you give feedback. When you take a step back, you're giving feedback differently during the lecture section than you are during the lab section. That's also what I'm talking about too.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, so now I'm going to jump right in to talk about the 5 ways that you can bring feedback into for teaching. It keeps having me down to another one. Okay. So here are the 5 things that we're going to talk about, Hernando, is gentle guidance, timeliness, be specific, student involvement, and then future orientation. So the first one is gentle guidance. Gentle guidance is defined through the research as guides through explicit expectations and ongoing coaching. What I mean by this is when, and it's taken up part of my slide, so I apologize for that. You're missing, oh no, you're actually not missing our slide. So when you think about gentle guidance, it's defined as students, I find that myself, I have to take a step back, is sometimes I'm giving feedback and talking more to the students that are struggling. And I have to take a step back, and I've been doing this for the past couple of years, and it's been working very well. And research is defined, the students are saying that they want to hear just as much feedback if they're excelling as if they're struggling. Both sets of students behave different and learn different with getting praise. And when I talked in the last session I did with this, all the instructors in the room agreed that they tend to give more thorough feedback and work more heavily with the students that are struggling. And they're all going to go back and take a hard look and make sure that they are also working with the students that are doing well, so those students can do even better. And what we want, and we also want to make sure that when you're giving negative feedback, you give it in manageable chunks. That I call it the sandwich style. Are you familiar with giving feedback in the sandwich style?
Yeah, it's kind of like what they do in relationship management, where you're not talking like I or you did this and both. I get what you're saying. I was trying to assimilate it to something, but.
Yeah, you think of the slices of bread as the positive and the peanut butter jelly the negative. So you begin with the positive and give them the constructive criticism and then end with the positive. And our students, I'm going to give you a couple of bullet points I want to accent on that. We found that our students are telling us when we look at the course evaluations and we get feedback, and Academic Affairs has shared this with us, that what they say is sometimes they feel that some of the feedback doesn't demonstrate that the instructor is actually reading their paper, or is not really, like what you're doing with the ERD document, for example, is you're giving very specific feedback and pointing out areas of improvement. Where sometimes the students are saying, how can I submit a 20-page paper and only get great job at the end, where they want to see feedback throughout. And they want to make sure it's actively evaluated. And the other thing that they said to us is being excessively positive without balance doesn't really give them the feedback, and they feel that it's not really authentic.
Yeah.
And we have to be careful that when we give praise, that we're not just giving praise, that we want to make sure that we're giving them, I have an example, like in my class, the class I teach, I have what's called progressive learning. And I have them learn, each assignment they do guides them towards a final project. And I give feedback on the individual projects, and I expect them to read the feedback, and then before they add to the final project, they have to correct what I've given them feedback on. So I'm doing gentle guidance by giving them feedback. I'm not letting them do a redo, but they're actually doing the redo for the final project.
And I think that's a little bit where well, I think I have two struggling points. And sorry, I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I think the next slide is like the timeline slide, right? Or
yes.
It's coming up. I think it's the second one.
Yeah,
two things, like the process of managing those changes that I'm requesting from the students becomes a little bit cumbersome when I have them, so the labs build on top of each other, but also the project builds on top of itself. So in both aspects, I'll have lab one says you need to make these changes, or I'll correct their paper and say you need to make these changes, and then making sure that those changes are being followed through in lab 3. Now, even after that, I've handed the student back their paper with all my comments on there, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So maybe I need to take my comments from paper and put them in Blackboard. That way, I still have them there. That could be a solution.
What I do is I give them comments. I use the inline grading, so they get the feedback right on the assignment itself, but I also take the general feedback that I want them to do, and I put it in where on the right column where you enter the grade. If you click on the attempt, I enter it right there as feedback to user.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Yeah. And then
to there.
Yes, and then they get it right away because they can just click on, when they see their grade, a little bubble comes up next to it. They click that, they can see the exact feedback.
Mm-hmm.
You had a second?
That makes sense. And then for the second one, like the other place where I think I have a tough time is, like I tell the students at the beginning of the semester, these are the deadlines. But I also tell them I understand things come up. So if you're going to hand something in a little bit late, just let me know, and I'll account for that, right? But then, like, what'll end up happening is I have students that are what's happening a lot is I have students who submit stuff before it's due and ask me to review it before it's due so that it can be completely correct when it's due. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
So I don't know what to do in that situation because I want to provide them feedback, but I don't want to just let everybody get 100 in the class because I'm giving feedback on every single thing that they're doing, right?
Right. That's a tough one. A very similar question came up in the session, and I let the folks in the room respond. And I'm going to say 90% of the folks that are teaching let the students submit it early for feedback, but not for every single assignment. Unfortunately for yours, it's all progressive that builds on top of each other, so how would you pick and choose which assignments to allow?
Exactly.
So that wouldn't be a good solution. What I tend to do with my students, and I say, if you want to submit it for reflection, and I give them the feedback, I truly believe I would rather give this is just me. Senior administration may not agree with me, but I am very motivational. I would rather have my students submit early, learn the correct way to do something, and get the full credit, rather than have them not have that opportunity and then not be able to do the assignment. Then they're on to the next one, and their learning is going to go further and further behind. I think what you're doing is fantastic. It's a lot of work for you, but I think from the student perspective, I think what you're doing is absolutely spectacular.
But part of my, I thank you, and my one concern is people come to me with their ERDs, right? I tell them, this is what's wrong with your ERD. This is what you need to correct in your following assignment. Then I get the second assignment, and they're still doing some of the same things wrong, but they handed it in early, so now I have to provide them feedback again, and they're still doing some of those things wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do.
So if they're still doing the same things wrong, but they're handing it in early, I'm pretty much just giving them the answers at that point.
Yeah, that's a sticky situation. I mean, I think if they're doing it, if it's built on top of each other, I think at that point it would warrant, say, personally, this is what came to my head, is I would not be afraid of, or I shouldn't be afraid. I would email the student back and say, thank you for submitting early. You have consistent errors from the previous assignment. For feedback, I request that you come to office hours. And then make them totally understand and make them accountable for their learning, and that's what we have, our TAs struggle with, and folks that help in the labs, is the students ask questions sometimes just to get the answers, not to really learn it. And it's such a fine line that you're walking on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
I think I actually just thought of a solution. I could use like learning through examples. So I tell them, this is what you did wrong with your paper initially, or your ERD, or whatever it may be. And then the second time, when we're building upon that and asking for feedback, I make sure not to reference that document directly, but work with some other example, or make sure I bring up the concept in some other way so that I can check if they understand it. Okay, that's not, I literally just thought of that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Oh, right. Can I pay that forward to other faculty?
Say that again?
Can I pay that forward to other faculty? Because that's a fantastic idea.
Oh.
I love it.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Solve the problem. That's what we were here for.
That's why I like these sessions. It's not even just me offering the information. It's learning from the people in the room. I mean, the conversation that I get to partake in and learn from, so this is fantastic. I'm glad you came on and you were willing to do this with me. But so just to, yay for you. So just to finish up the gentle guidance, I just want to talk about this slide for just a couple of seconds. This gentleman, John Hattie, he is absolutely amazing. His research, he's one of my favorite. There's a couple in the next round we're going to talk about, two Grant Wiggins. These are two of the folks that, as I went through my master's degree, I used their research. They are just so fantastic of talking about how to help the students perform and improve. And this is a copy of his book, and his book is absolutely fabulous. And I put his details down there, but if you ever want to learn more about visible learning and active learning, he's a fantastic resource. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to move right on to what you were talking about a couple minutes ago, is timeliness. Basically, it's give immediately after student proves to show proof of learning and give at the right time. And so for timeliness, what we're saying is our students are saying here on campus, we talked to some online students and face-to-face students. Both of them say that when they give the feedback, they want it to be given back at the right time. And what they mean by that is what you're doing with your ERD diagrams is you're immediately marking them up and then giving them back so that they have plenty of time to absorb it before they move to the next lab. Mm-hmm. Many students here at the iSchool, this is the #1 issue at Syracuse University across the board. Across the board, we've heard when we do assessment evaluations that the students are saying that they don't receive timely feedback. So from the online perspective, our graduate online students also go one step further, and they actually have asked repeatedly in the feedback that the faculty establish a time frame, put it in the syllabus, or say it in the class, but established that time frame for when the instructor was going to respond back. You're talking about grading. This is more on the grading and receiving grades and timely feedback on grades. And one of our students, quote, said, when I received timely feedback, it gave me ample time to use this information in a meaningful way. It allowed me to process it and use it to prepare for my next assignment. And that's exactly what you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when we think about this feedback that they're talking about is both in writing and verbally. You know, it could be one-on-one, it can be even in groups or teams. You know, they're talking about feedback from activities that they complete in class. Talk about graded assignments. Sometimes my activities in class, I actually, to make them meaningful, I give some point value to activities in class, the same that you do for your labs. And a lot of faculty don't give a point value or don't let the students know why is this particular activity, or so they're also talking about feedback on the pre part and also the post. Does that make sense?
It does.
So what they're talking about here as well is they want to have timely feedback of, they want to understand more on why am I doing this assignment? What is the goal? And that's going to lead into the next one. But also, so they want to have the feedback in here before the assignment, and then they also want the feedback after the assignment.
Mm-hmm. I guess, like I know this semester I've fallen a little bit behind on my labs, grading my labs. But what I try to do is just go through the lab in the following class, in the class after the one it's due.
Okay.
I was doing the one where it's due, but then what I saw is a lot of students would wait for me to give the answer. So I submitted this like 2 hours after you told me to submit it, or after the deadline. Like, can you still take it? Are you following what I'm saying? So what I actually do is wait an extra class, and then at that point, like, if it's a week and a half late, like, I know if you're just waiting for the answer.
Right.
So that's what I do if I don't get the labs graded by the next class.
That's a good idea. So that leads to the second bullet that I didn't talk about. And with that bullet, so you led right into that nicely, is inform them if you're not able to give promptly. So when you set the expectations and the response, you know, when you're going to respond back, but if you can't, so what you've done nicely is you've told them, I'm going to now give a general class overview in the next lab. That's all the students are asking for is, you know, even if you can't grade it in a timely manner, so if I put in my syllabus, I'm going to grade and give feedback for the next assignment, all they're asking for is if you can't, we all have lives. You know, we all have things that pop up. You know, just the expectations. Because we ask our students, or at least I do, I say, I expect if you aren't going to be able to turn your assignment in on time, you need to reach out to me through email and tell me, and then we can have a discussion of a potential extension. And then I tell my students, if you don't turn it in on time, you're going to expect a 0. I expect you to do it anyways for that 0, because it's all progressive learning.
Say that one more time about the 0. You broke up a little bit.
What I put on my syllabus is I do not accept late assignments, and they have one exception throughout if it's an excused absence. They come to me ahead of time, but I will, as soon as the due date and I'm grading, I pop a 0 in as placeholders for the ones that did not submit. And if they don't submit an assignment, I'm going to go back to them. I'm going to require them to still turn it in by the next class, but they're still going to get the 0. Because if they don't do it, they can't move on and continue learning towards the final project.
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
And I'll tell you what, I
But they
very,
still get the 0?
absolutely,
Okay.
unless if they come to, except, Fernando, if they come to me ahead of time and they say to me, they give me a legitimate reason why they can't get it in on time, they can then turn it in by the new deadline I give them, and I give them full credit, or whatever credit they deserve. But if they simply don't turn it in and don't have a conversation with me, the reason I do that is because mine is an organizational behavior class, what I teach right now. Then in the spring I teach presentation and design skills, and I teach them to be professional. And I say to them, if your supervisor expects you to turn in your project, you're not going to just not turn it in.
Yeah, I do.
You're going to get fired.
I don't do the same thing, but I tell them the same thing. Because I told one student, I had students submit their proposals early so that I could give them feedback on it, and I gave them an extra week because I gave the proposal, or I gave so they had to hand in design reports. I gave them their proposals back a week late, so I told them, you guys can have an extra week to give me the design draft report. And then students were handing it in a week after the draft deadline, and then, like 2 or 3 of them. And then I graded it, and they told me, I graded it, and I said, hey, you can have a couple of extra days. And they're like, we wanted to talk about when we can hand this in by. And I said a couple of days. How many people are in a couple? So, and they were like, 2. They were like, well, you just graded this and gave it back to us. I'm like, yeah, but the deadline for the draft was a week and a half ago, and you're just handing it in now. How can you expect me to grade it in 2 days and get it back to you, but you don't want to get it done in 2 days?
See, that's why I say set the expectations, and I agree with you. It's got to be it's almost like a two-way street, so to speak. Time ends. Because we expect them to get it in on time, so they deserve, if we say we're going to grade it by a certain time, we need to adhere to those. I agree. So this is my other favorite, one of my favorite researchers. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2015. God bless him. But Grant Wiggins, this quote just resonates with me. A great problem in education is untimely feedback. As educators, we should work overtime to figure out ways to ensure that students get more timely feedback and opportunities to use it while the attempt and effects are still fresh in their mind. And Hernando, that sounds like it's exactly what you do. So you're spot on with the feedback. So keep doing the fantastic job that you're doing.
Thank you.
So next thing we talk about is to be
I was literally
specific.
about to ask you a question, and you led right into the topic with be specific.
I read your mind.
Can I interrupt you, or do you want to just keep going through it and save it for a little bit later?
Well, this is what I was going to talk about. Does this fit into the question that you were going to ask?
Communicate learning objectives, and yep, this is exactly what I was going to ask. So
perfect.
One problem that I have is this isn't the problem, but my labs were made by Yang Wang, right? And I'm still using some of his material. And on the material, it says the expectations for the grading, right? So it's a lab out of 5 points. You get 5 points if you get all the concepts correct. You get 4.5 if you get one concept wrong, but there was an understanding of the concept. You get 4 points if you get 2 concepts wrong, and blah blah blah, right? So that's how he had his grading. That's how he explained to his students how he's grading the lab. But what I'm finding is that's not clear enough. I'm trying to find the balance of telling them these are the concepts you need to cover in your lab without actually telling them this is what you need to make sure to put in your lab or you're going to lose the points. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so if you're thinking, do you do it based on a rubric? Is that how you set it up, as a rubric? Or just made a list?
I guess it's more of a rubric.
Okay, so if you think of the rubric from moving from 5 to a 4.5, you could say that, you can change the rubric based on each week. So say this week's lab, you discussed 5 concepts. And if you clearly say in your lecture, we're going to discuss these 5 concepts, in your lab, you can say, to get a 5, you clearly define and discuss the 5 concepts, gave evidence towards these concepts. You can list what that 5 means. And then you can lower it down very easily and just say, just only had 4 concepts or evidence of 4 concepts. Or you can just say, or a percentage of, if you want to keep one rubric across all labs, you can possibly say discuss 100% of the concepts and evidence of 75%, 50%. So that way you're telling them that they need to discuss all concepts and give evidence, but you're not naming the concepts.
Okay. That makes sense.
What do you think?
Yeah, it makes sense.
That's how I build my rubrics that way. If I say, for example, I'm going to have them do a presentation and I want them to clearly define all of the design principles and the basic design concepts, I say to them in the rubric, you covered all design, and I go backwards. So they cover them all, and then I say if you cover, I use percentages, but because there's too many to, if they want to list, and that's why I can easily dot them. And then I have proof. Look, there's 4 design principles, and you only discussed 3. Hello?
Yeah. It makes sense.
Yeah, and that's without telling them. So I'm not sure, what bullet this one goes in, but so this is where we're going to talk about an actual article, which I'm going to show you in the next slide. So this information, this is directly from research that several faculty got together and did a survey, but they did a study. And when they talked with the students, this is a lot of students saying, and then in the article I'm going to give you a summation of it in the next slide.
Okay.
But they said that, you really want to communicate the learning objective and outcome in clear student-friendly language for every single learning artifact. It goes from your syllabus to clearly define objectives of what they're going to learn in your course. Every week, you should have weekly objectives to tell the students what they're going to learn. But any learning artifact that is included in that week, such as your lab, make sure you communicate clearly what the objective is, what the outcome is. They also said, give them an opportunity to self-assess at the beginning. What faculty tend to do is when they give instructions, and I have learned the hard way of how to, like, if I'm doing an in-class activity, for example. Yesterday in class, I finished up the lecture from Tuesday, and I gave them a case study to complete in teams in class. What I do is I said, okay, the first few minutes, I want you to quietly read, absorb. I don't want to hear any talking. So allow everybody to absorb and then self-assess on what the approach should be for the case study. And that really works in my class. It may not work in your class or others, but it's giving the introverts and the people that observe a little slower, because I've got some folks that read so fast and they immediately want to jump in and go, oh, well, I have an idea. Well, you know what? That's not fair to the slower absorbers and the people that are introverts. So that's what they're talking about there. And then the next one that says comments should be specific to the learner, not cookie cutter approach. when you're doing your feedback to the overall class, you're doing like general feedback, but make sure that you're doing specific to the learner, like you're doing the ERDs. So you're doing a nice combination. And then the give less feedback, believe it or not, some students in this research study said the instructors tell us too much. They're not allowing us to do our own learning. We don't need to be told, step by step by step by step. I really wish they wouldn't do that. And I found that this bullet was so hilarious because a lot of us think that the students want more thorough guidance, but we're realizing they want less, which is pretty cool.
Okay.
And the one thing that I want to talk about here is this is a great time for me to reiterate that when we're talking to the students about objectives, about identifying their own learning, we also want to make sure that they are helping us with formative assessment and giving us feedback. So I'm going to encourage you and all the instructors here at iSchool to put the course evaluation information on your syllabus, talk about it in the first day of your class, and then talk about the course evaluation at least 2 or 3 times throughout the semester, and encourage the students to take notes as they're getting their feedback, as they're going through the course. Jot down what they really liked and what was it. Jot down, gosh, this lab was really hard to follow the directions. Well, jot it down so when they do the course evaluations, they can give you very specific feedback like you're doing all semester.
Okay.
So the next, so that leads me to, this is the article, Amanda, that I pulled this information from. It's from the MPBA journal. Margaret Kraft, who works with us, found this article. And the article title is Student Assignment Feedback. Do we give them what they really want and or expect? It's fabulous. It's a fabulous article. And what I did, pulled out 3 of the things that I felt were really key. So I took this entire article and summarized it in 3 bullets. So the first key point that I pulled in the article is provide clear understanding. Of course, that equals learn, so students will learn more effectively. Secondly is timely and high quality makes the most powerful tool in student learning. And throughout the entire article, students reflected on that second bullet point. They really liked it when it was timely but high in quality, and they kept saying that that was the most powerful tool. In addition to what they're learning in the assignments per se, they are learning just as much from high quality feedback from the instructors. Exactly what you're having them do, because you're giving them feedback and allowing them to redo the assignment, that's a powerful tool. Mm-hmm. And they said what they really don't want to hear is great job. Not quite there yet. Good start. What they want to hear is what you're providing for them is give them insight of what they did right. Praise what they've done right, but also tell them what they've done wrong, but do it in constructive criticism way. And the other thing that came out of the article, and I'm going to add something from our own students here at the iSchool, said they love to get reminded and they love to have a review of the assignment. So they say from the student perspective that they don't want the instructors to assume that just because they're reading the assignment instructions and because it doesn't mean that they understand what concepts or what they want for their understanding to do the assignment. So they said they love getting reminds, they love having reviews. So that I got this one statement that says review again, remind, and then review again. That was one anonymous statement from one of our students.
Peggy, I got to run at 1 o'clock. I have a meeting for work.
Oh, you do?
We can keep going till 1 o'clock, though.
Okay, so just really quick, for student development, I will go really, really fast. Students say they want to be able to
when you're done?
Yeah, we can end right here if you want, Fernando, and that way, what I could do possibly is, even though you go off, if you want, I can continue recording the next two concepts, and then I'll also share I can share it with you one-on-one, and then I will also send you the PowerPoint. It's actually up in the Faculty Center website.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
Okay, so do you want to, we can end here, and then I will keep recording the next two, and then if you want, you can listen to the rest of the recording.
That's fine. That's great.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Yep, thank you for helping me through this. I definitely learned a few things that I'll definitely be implementing, if not this semester, in the following semesters.
Okay, and if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and send you a link to Qualtrics to give me feedback on this, if you don't mind.
Sure, sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Yep, you have a good weekend.
Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So I'm going to keep going so students, for the student involvement, students say that they want them to be allowed to explore samples of previous student work. I do this in some of my classes for certain assignments, others I don't. If I feel it's a tougher concept and that the students need to have examples and it won't take them away from their own learning, I will give them examples, and sometimes I give examples after they've started it, or sometimes even after. But some of the tougher concepts, it's okay to do that. But they also like to have practice writing relevant feedback. They like to be involved in their own feedback, and that helps them develop skills in constructive criticism. When we talk about different things that we want our students to understand, like critical thinking and other ways that we want them to learn professionally before they graduate, constructive criticism and being able to do that is one effective thing. And we do that effectively by having them do peer evaluations. I have them do peer evaluations in both of my classes. I teach IST 335, and I teach IST 444. In IST 344, I have them do peer evaluations. For example, the first two presentations, I have gotten such higher level presentations right from the beginning of class. I have the students come the day before, the class before I teach twice a week. They come with their presentations and they get into their teams and I give them a rubric and the students present their presentation to their team members and get feedback. The first one is they just get verbal feedback. The second presentation, I also make them fill out the rubric and give them written feedback to the rubric as well as verbal. This gets them using the rubric, and by having them use the rubric for both of these presentations, they have now been exposed to the rubric and know exactly how I'm going to grade and give feedback for the assignment. This research right here for effective instructor feedback perceptions of online graduate students, this again is from a Journal of Educators Online. And this information, even though it says online graduate students, it's so effective for regardless if it's face-to-face or online. They're saying effective feedback is not top-down with instructor in control. It can also be from the student, like I said, peer-to-peer. It can also be bottom-up from the student back to the instructor and student to student. And they also say mutual process with both instructor and student coming to agreement for feedback with the students. What some faculty do is they actually have their students review the syllabus day one and allow the students to give feedback, and they say that they can negotiate, and sometimes they actually modify the syllabus to meet that particular group of students' needs. But that's where the mutual process comes through, and they agree on it through the feedback. It could be as simple as opting out. They might have 4 quizzes through the semester. And with negotiating and going through the process, they might agree on, well, we have a lot of assignments, therefore I'm still going to do the 4 quizzes, but I'll allow you to opt out of 1. And again, the peer feedback. This ensures feedback is constructive and focused with practice. And again, when you do the peer feedback, you can also balance it with previous student examples. When you do the peer feedback, you can do it individually or you can do it in a group. I use it also effectively for in-class activities. I have them give feedback to each other, and I also have them share out to the class, and then the class can give each team or individual's feedback. The fifth is future orientation. How do you link to the learning objective, and how is it goal referenced to feedback? So when we, again, from the same Journal of Educators Online, the students were saying that what they want is, how do you assist them to look forward? Not just at the learning artifact that they're working on, not just the class, but how do you look forward in the class, and also how do you look forward to the rest of their academic career out to the professional career? How does that help them prepare for the course itself and also to look forward? We here at the iSchool have immersion experiences that we encourage faculty encourage our students to take. We also encourage faculty to bring in guest speakers. We have what's called experiential learning. So there's many, many ways that we can make, for bullet number 2, we can make applicable to practical areas outside of coursework. Another thing that I do to help them look forward to the future is I have them reflect on a lot of their assignments. And that reflection, in that reflection, I also have them not summarize what they're doing, but reflect on what they just did, but also bring in their opinions and their personal stories into that reflection. It's amazing watching the students grow through I'm teaching 335, as I'm watching them progress through this behavior organizations, is watching them go through what it means to be a professional while they're a student. It's really amazing. And also, you can incorporate mock interviews, you can bring in practice real life skills, anything that you can have them do in the class. Also, I have one thing called negotiation exercise that I have them go through, and the negotiation exercise went very, very well, and I did a formative assessment with the students, and they loved it. Half the class were the negotiators asking for a raise or increase in benefits. The other half were the managers. They went through that, and then they switched roles. They said that was the most practical, hands-on learning experience that they have had in class in a long time. They really, really loved it. Now if we move on to the research side of it, I'm going to go back to what Hattie said in 2011. Effective feedback is most often oriented around the specific achievement that students are or should be working toward. One thing that I do in my class, I'm going to encourage you to do in your class, is I talked a little bit with Hernando about having students with the course evaluations keep a notebook or a running formative assessment of what they're learning in class so they can complete that course evaluation very thoroughly. But on the flip side, I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing. As you're teaching the class, if something pops out at you that went extremely well, or, you know, this in-class activity went so well, the students got great feedback, they loved it, note it down in the notebook. Note down what went well and what you did, especially if you changed something and did something different. On the flip side, write down things that go well, things that you'd love to update. Then at the end of the semester, you have a nice notebook with formative assessment on your class of things that you can change for the upcoming semester. And you can even share the next semester those ideas with the student and say, gosh, I did this exercise in class last year. This is what went really well and this is what didn't work well. I changed it. You can tell them before or after, and then again, get formative assessment from your students. And then it just keeps evolving. Your course you just keep enhancing and making your course more powerful for the students to have that learning experience. The other thing that's, you know, I want to encourage you to do is make the best use of time. Focus on the goals and the learning objective of the assignment. What do you need them to know, not want them to know? and allow the students to give that feedback as they're going through and really listen to what the students are saying. We know that it takes a lot of time to enhance your course, to do formative assessment. We know that you have a lot of content to deliver, but take the time and allow this future orientation for both you and the students. At this point in time, I would ask you now to take a step back and do your own formative assessment. Now that you've listened to the whole session, I'd like you to pick one of your own learning targets. It could be an assignment, a lab, a quiz, an in-class activity, a discussion that you have online or in class, or a project. Take a step back and say to yourself, what is that current method that you use of giving feedback? Is there a new strategy that you could apply that you just learned in this session? I would love for you to share it back out with me. If you're going to take the time to do this and something that you're going to change, I would love to hear it. Please, please share it with me. To summarize this session, we talked about gentle guidance, which guides through explicit expectations and ongoing coaching. We talked about timeliness, to give immediately after student shows proof of learning, give it the right time. Be specific, make sure everyone has a clear understanding of the learning path. Student involvement, students have an active role, coach and empower students to critique their own efforts. And future orientation, how to link the learning objective and be goal referenced in your class. I'd like to thank you very much for Hernando for attending the session, and for those of you that are watching the recording. Please let me know if you have any questions, and please, if you do listen to the recording and take the time to apply or change the way you're going to do a feedback method, please share it with me. Thank you and have a wonderful day.